So you guys are going to get a 2-for-1 today because it's Halloween and I've been I've been asked to make a video about this a couple times. I do make videos on most of this stuff. It sometimes takes a while. You just got to get a spark of inspiration, etc. So It Follows. It Follows is one of the best horror movies in years. It is very deep. It's very well made. It's just a very interesting movie in a lot of aspects. It's very visually interesting. It's very hard to tell when this movie takes place. It kind of has this surreal, dreamlike, timeless quality to it. It's hard to tell if it takes place in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. I guess there's a couple hints that it's fairly recent, but overall it really feels timeless, and a lot of the way the characters dress and look just really could belong in any kind of era. Um, it follows, I guess, to me. I hate to call everything this, but it kind of, to me, kind of resembles kind of the end of the road to some extent of kind of the postmodern era. It kind of represents how much we've cheapened sex as a society, how we've kind of forsaken youth. We've stopped to value purity. We've stopped to value kind of real emotions, etc. And I think it just kind of strips it bare and kind of leaves us to look at a world in which we've stopped asking any of the big questions. We've stopped kind of thinking about good and evil. We've stopped thinking about life and death. We've stopped thinking about love. We've stopped thinking about anything really but kind of sex in a very crass and crude and materialistic way. And I think it just kind of shows the signs of the emptiness of such a society. So that being said, let's get into the plot. I will, of course, be telling the story of It Follows, and we will also have some just lots of stuff to talk about. This is a very interesting movie. I, for one, I love this movie. I gave it a 9 out of 10 when I saw it in theaters. It is excellent, and there's going to be spoilers in this. I'm just giving you a warning. I don't normally give you a warning because a lot of stuff I review isn't that good, or it's been out for a while. If you haven't seen this movie, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in it. So I recommend turning this off if you actually might watch the movie and going to watch it now. It'll be a good thing to do for Halloween. So, sorry if that intro wasn't the best, but it's kind of hard to talk about it without getting into the plot. So the film begins with a young woman fleeing her house and driving to the beach. It's not really explained who she is or where she's going, but she tearfully calls her father, and her body is found brutally mutilated and murdered on the beach. Unfortunately, we aren't really told what any of this is. We just know that something was chasing her, and that she was facing her death. It's kind of confusing because she looks a bit like the main character of this movie, and it's just kind of ambiguous as to what's going on. So, the film then cuts to Jay. Jay is our main character. She's the actress in this picture. I found her very beautiful in kind of that girl next door believable way. I mean, there's different kinds of beauty. There's kind of like the patrician, unattainable, aristocratic, goddess-like beauty, and then there's kind of just like the pretty girl next door who you just want to kind of hug, and you just kind of you would imagine her kind of like holding a baby or something and just going Gucci Gucci goo. But yeah, there's different kinds of beauty. I find her very attractive myself. So the film opens with Jay, a Michigan college student, going to see a film with her boyfriend Hugh. In the theater, Hugh points out a woman standing at the entrance who Jay cannot see. So there's some strange woman in the theater, and Jay asks them to leave. Outside, Jay and Hugh have sex in his car. And it's really, this scene actually disturbed me more than a lot of the murders. They just have the most boring, emotionless sex I've ever seen. Just literally, they keep all their clothes on. He just kind of sticks it in her. He just kind of thrusts a couple of times. They both have these kind of like dank, depressed images on. And then he kind of comes, I guess. But there's just no passion in it. And I get, obviously, it's not like movies often give an unrealistic view of it, etc. But there's just it just feels like they're having sex because it's expected of them, or that's just what teenagers do. They don't even seem to take like the most basic hedonistic pleasure in it. I just found it a very kind of disturbing, strange scene. So after that, Hugh incapacitates Jay with chloroform. She wakes up in a warehouse tied to a wheelchair, and Hugh explains that their having sex has passed on a curse. An entity which can only be seen by those with the curse, and can take the appearance of any person. The it and it follows is this entity. What determines whose appearance it undertakes, I'm not really sure. It sometimes takes an appearance of a person they know, but it's always disturbing. It's always kind of unclean. It often looks drowned or mutated or brutalated. It just looks very creepy, disturbing, almost kind of zombie-like. And it always walks exceedingly slowly. The creature's very slow, and we'll get into a bit more of that later. So, So the creature will follow Jay at a slow walking pace. If it catches her, it will kill her and pursue the previous person to have passed it on. After spotting a naked woman knocking towards them, Hugh drives Jay home and flees. So the next day, the police cannot find the woman or Hugh, who has been living under a false identity. At school, Jay sees an old woman in a hospital gown walking towards her, invisible to the others. Jay's sister Kelly and her friends agree to spend the night at the same house. So we are also kind of introduced to her friend Paul, who's basically kind of the friend zone guy. He's kind of the slightly nerdy kind of beta kid who the main character uses to do favors for her. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. Okay, so apparently the woman at the beginning of the film was also a woman who had sex with Jay. It's interesting because apparently, despite the fact that it should be theoretically easier for women to have sex, it appears that they more often kill them. For whatever reason, men just have an easier time having detached sex with people and transmitting the it to them. So yeah, so the demon in this film, I'll just call it a demon because that's what it is. I call it an STD, a sexually transmitted demon, if you will. So the sexually transmitted demon is inevitable. It can't be stopped that we know of, although this kind of becomes an interesting issue later on. And the idea is it will kill you. It'll eventually come for you. It takes a long time to get you, though, because it's very slow. And you can pass it to the next person by having sex with them. If it kills that person, then it comes back to the original person. So I guess the implication of the opening is that Jay had sex with the other girl, then the demon killed her, and then he got it back, and then he passed it on to Jay. So, let's see here. So we're introduced to Paul, as I said, who is obviously in love with Jay, and she kind of tells him about it, and he agrees to help her. He's kind of the friend zone guy who actually kind of has like an emotional connection with her. But as with all of these movies, the fact that he has an emotional connection with her and actually loves her for who she is means that he's the last person she'll ever have sex with. Because that's just how modern women are for whatever reason. If someone actually likes them, that's bad, but if the guy's kind of like a douchebag who will have emotionless sex with them in the back seat, then that's good. So Jay goes to school, and after a night in which it does not follow, the police can't find Hugh or the woman, and Jay begins to think the whole thing was just kind of some weird acid trip caused by the chloroform. So she's in school, and outside of the window she spots an old woman in a hospital gown walking towards her. Everyone around her does not appear to notice. So let's see here. So they run away from school and back to her house, and it has not come for them. So Jay, her sister, her friend, and the boy who's interested in her all kind of get together and agree to kind of hold down the fort and support each other until things can happen. During the night, Paul, the guy who's in love with her, hears a noise and examines a smashed window. He looks around but does not see anyone. Jay, however, sees a naked woman with dark eyes walking towards her. She runs to tell the others, but none of them can see anything. Suddenly, a tall man with dark eyes walks into the room. Jay then flees the house. Jay runs to the nearby playground where her friends eventually catch up with her. A neighbor named Greg offers to help the group by giving them a ride. Jay and her friends plan to confront Hugh, so after tracking him down by figuring out his real address, he tells Jay that she needs to sleep with someone. He tells Jay that she needs to sleep with someone in order to pass the curse on to someone else. Meanwhile, while they're doing it, they find the place in which Hugh had been living, and it's I think I remember it being really creepy. There's like a whole bunch of like pornography and stuff, and there's all these like traps set up to kind of tell him when it's coming so he can get out of the way. It's a very kind of disturbing scene. So the group goes back to Greg's house. Greg is kind of this bad boy neighbor. Jay deduces that she needs to learn how to use a gun while the group is sitting around by the water. Let's see here. The entity takes on the appearance of some random person and begins to attack Jay. Jay flees, and it takes the appearance of a tall old man and then Paul. Jay manages to shoot... Okay, sorry, I'm getting confused. Okay, so they basically go to Greg's summer home, which is kind of like a cottage out in the countryside. And there's a gun there, and Jay learns to shoot the gun while they're there. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting. They're trying to take kind of proactive steps to deal with it. They're able to go there for a couple of days because the thing's only following at a walking pace, and it takes a long time to go anywhere. The thing can walk through doors, windows, etc., and appears not to be affected. It's weird because I think it can interact with the outside world, but can also walk through things. It's a very kind of interestingly limited, all-powerful evil presence. So they're out in the countryside at this house, and they just kind of talk and kind of hang out like teenagers normally do. And she takes a gun and she fires around and manages to shoot it, and it hurts it a bit, but it doesn't die. Jay then attempts to drive away, but crashes into a cornfield and breaks her arm. When Jay awakens, she is in a hospital being treated for her broken arm. After she is released, Jay realizes that she needs to pass the curse on to someone else. Greg, being the smarmy bastard he is, doesn't believe in the curse and thinks Jay is just schizophrenic, but he's a horny bastard and Jay is a hot blonde girl, so he's like, I'll have sex with you and I'll take the curse. So, she fucks Greg, and Paul is sad because he got cock-blocked and friend-zoned again and got cucked by Greg. Unfortunately, at home, Jay looks out the window to see Greg walking down the street to his house. When he gets to his window, he breaks it and enters. Jay then finds out that it has taken the appearance of Greg. Jay runs over to the house and peeks inside to see it taking on the appearance of Greg's mom. Jay attempts to warn Greg who is on the telephone, but it jumps on top of Greg and has sex with him while killing him, which is an exceedingly disturbing scene because it's his mother having sex with him and killing him. Now, it's interesting to note that all the sex that people get killed for in this is kind of premarital. It's premarital and is, generally speaking, kind of unemotional teenage sex with someone you don't actually care about. And to me, that's kind of a point of this movie. It's kind of this personification of kind of hookup culture, of kind of this lack of emotion in dealing with sex. It's just kind of like everybody's screwing everyone. No one can really have a real relationship anymore. People kind of treat each other like shit. Type of thing. So, yeah. So, then we are taken to another extremely disturbing scene in this movie. After Greg's death, she falls asleep. She awakens in the morning after having fled from Greg's house. She wakes up near a beach and spots 3 young men on a boat. She then undresses and goes into the water, hoping that she can sleep with one of the men and pass on the curse. What actually happens is never really explained. Whether she has some kind of creepy gangbang orgy with the three of them and passes it on, and then all three of them get killed or not. It's a very disturbing scene. You can tell that the whole thing is just kind of emotionally breaking her, as I think over the course of it, she kind of becomes more and more negative about sex, partially because it's going to lead to her death. But I think she kind of realizes her earlier mistakes. So back at home, Paul says that he will sleep with Jay, but rebuffs him since she does not want him to be killed. Jay spots it on as posing as a naked man spying on her from the roof. Jay then comes up with a plan to kill it. This is kind of an interesting part of the movie where they set up a trap to attempt to kill it. Basically, they have a couple advantages. It is extremely slow. It can also appears to not possess any intelligence, only able of just blindly lunging towards Jay. So they go to a deserted swimming pool. This is kind of one of the more interesting scenes in the movie as we see them drive through Detroit. This film takes place in a white suburb of Detroit, and they just kind of drive through the kind of destroyed ruins of Detroit, and it feels like it could be from any decade. That's kind of a common theme in this movie. Any scene in the movie really feels like it could be any decade. So they reach the pool, and the idea is that Jay will go into the center of the pool. The thing can only move in a straight line, so what will happen is they have a whole bunch of electrical devices set up. So they will lure it into the pool. Jay will get out, and they'll kick all the electrical devices in, electrocuting it and destroying it once and for all. Which is an interesting plan because it's not very really established whether or not the thing can be it can be hurt. So Jay goes into the pool where she finally spots it. It, however, has figured out the plan and begins to throw electrical devices in the water, attempting to kill Jay. Fortunately, they blow a circuit, which, although it means that their whole plan doesn't really make sense. So when they throw the devices in the pool, they just short circuit and don't hurt Jay, but it also means their plan's not going to work. In desperation, Paul pulls out their gun and begins firing at the invisible target. He hurts one of the friends, but he also manages to hit it in the head, which seems to actually hurt it. It falls into the pool and begins to attempt to grab Jay and drag her under, but Paul succeeds in shooting it in the head again, and it collapses. The entity disappears in a cloud of blood, leaving no body behind. After this, Jay and Paul have emotionless, traumatic sex, finally. Kind of represents, I guess, the fulfillment of Paul's fantasies, but in the worst way possible. He's finally with the girl he loves, but she's kind of this broken person, devoid. What should be a joyous occasion of two people who are actually kind of compatible and actually probably could have a real relationship and get married and have children is actually a tragic circumstance. Afterwards, Paul drives past prostitutes in a seedy part of town. The implication is that they aren't sure if it is actually dead, but they're going to pass it on to prostitutes. Prostitutes have sex with a lot of people, so it'll just be contained within that area, and they'll never see it again. So later that day, Jay and Paul are walking down the street holding hands while someone walks behind them. And then the film ends leaving it ambiguous. Is it just some random person? Is it it? Did they succeed in passing it along? Did they succeed in killing it? None of these things are really resolved. Which would be interesting if they were resolved, but in a sense, it's kind of okay that they didn't. It was a very interesting movie. I think it really kind of just touched on kind of what postmodernity is for a lot of us. It's kind of this society where we have very kind of cold, impersonal relationships with one another. It's this society where people just kind of act in whatever fashion they are kind of instructed to act. A lot of kind of the natural humanity. Lost childhood is also a theme. Like all horror movies, It's kind of a twisted, extremely kind of excessive morality tale. Um, and it follows basically the sin of promiscuous sex leads to your death. Kind of, you throw away your childhood innocence by kind of having sex with some random guy, and it leads to catastrophic results. So it's kind of on a very base level, kind of a metaphor for things like rape, for STDs, for lost innocence, for the damages that promiscuous sex can do to your psyche, etc. But at the same time, it's also, yeah, very much kind of yeah, a tale like that. So I don't know. I didn't really have too much to add. I have thought about this a great deal, but I think the movie's pretty straightforward. I think it's fairly deep, but not very broad, if that makes sense. I think just from telling kind of the story of the film and giving my limited commentary, it's fairly straightforward what it's about. I would just kind of recommend watching it. It's not something like V for Vendetta or some other movies where I can really go into a huge analysis. It's pretty direct, and it's more kind of emotional than strictly like rational. It's not something I can really kind of tear apart like I can maybe Star Wars or something like that, because it has a very kind of simple, haunting plot. And this is kind of one that's hard without actually seeing the visuals and music and other aspects of the film. So It Follows is an interesting morality tale. It's an interesting story about the inevitability of death, about how it's always there and how you choose to live your life, also how you choose to die. It's an interesting movie, one of the best horror movies of the 21st century, and I highly recommend it. This is Argent Templar signing out.